Homage to the Triple Gem. So years ago, when I was a young man, now I'm a middle-aged man, used to really love to go camping. Actually, even now, I still like to get out into the forest. But that was probably where it all began. This kind of, at least where part of this kind of liking for wilderness began, was my mother and her ex-partner, family friend, used to take myself and usually one friend, I think it was a few times it was two, out to camp in the Canadian wilderness. And Canada has really beautiful wilderness, actually. Not just saying that because I'm Canadian. Canada has vast stretches of wilderness and really lovely forests. And so you have these kind of, pine forests, deciduous forests, and then you have these lakes. And the lakes are not really like clear water like you'd see in the ocean, in the Bahamas or so. They're kind of like a little bit murky, a little bit silty. So you can't see all the way to the bottom in them. And my mother's friend, ex-partner, is really influential in my life. He was a little bit of a daring guy, and he would like to go up and find these rocks and then jump off the rock into these lakes. And so over the years, myself, mainly me, and another friend who used to come with me, I used to kind of force him to to join. We would kind of go and join this gentleman jumping off these rocks, and then we got older. And there was one time we decided to go out and scout for our own place to jump. And when we did that, it was at this park called Bon Echo Provincial Park. And this park was really interesting when it had these rumors about it, that there were these like a sea serpent living in the in this lake. So the lake itself, I think, was about 400 feet deep, and these lakes are very dark. And there'd been divers who'd been down there and said they'd seen fish that were so big they would never come back again. And I think the government even stuck a net down there one time, and the net came back with a hole in it that was a meter in diameter. So, you imagine the size of some of these fish that are very, reasonably long, and the hole is a meter in diameter. So, that's a diameter meter hole is a pretty big hole. So we went to this place, and the rock that we were thinking to jump off, we found a place we were thinking to jump off of. We went up there. And one of the things that you do is before jumping is you kind of snorkel underneath the water to make sure that there's no rocks there that you're going to impale yourself on, that you're not going to jump into this water and get killed. So went snorkeling in this water and diving down. And like most lakes in Canada, when you dive down, you can't really see all the way to the bottom. You can see kind of 3 or 4 feet, and then another 3 or 4 feet opens up, and then another 3 or 4 feet, another 3 or 4 feet opens up. But if you look back to the top, you can see all the way to the top. And also there's this really interesting, maybe not interesting, but there's this thing that happens in Canadian lakes where you dive down, and after you get past a certain point, there's what they call a thermocline. And so you would think that the temperature in a lake would just, steadily decrease on kind of an even grade as you go down. But actually, it seems to be in layers. So you have this kind of layer, and then as you get to the edge of that layer, there's this membrane or so of temperature, and you go into a cooler patch. And if you keep going down, you might encounter more of these thermoclines. So the training of a person's mind can actually have overlap with this with the way that one experiences diving in Canadian lakes, and maybe especially lakes like Bon Echo, where there's fear of a sea monster underneath. In that the way that a person constructs their world has many elements to it, many layers to it, and these layers aren't actually always apparent. There's kind of thoughts, there's perceptions, there's emotions. They all get glommed together into a person's experience of the world that seems so solid. Seems so real. And as we come to meditate, especially if we just focus on a simple topic like just the in and out breath, breath coming in, breath going out, breath coming in, breath going out, then what can tend to happen is that as the mind will gradually kind of fall away from some of these perceptions, And then it reaches a point where a lot of agitation can actually come up. It's kind of this agitation, or there can be fear, or there can be, anger, whatever, some kind of emotion, really strong emotion comes up. And the mind feeling like boxed in. You can't really go anywhere. It's just been boxed in for a long time. So if a person perseveres past that point, what one will tend to get is a deeper level of peace, where it's like those things that were causing one agitation, those things that were causing one worry, now one can look at those things and not be affected by them. It's kind of, it's a temporary thing, but, there's kind of this peace that comes unexpectedly when this agitation falls away. So when you go diving in these lakes, especially that one, sometimes the next 3 feet ahead, there's a sense of fear that comes up. And, it's not unreasonable to have this sense of fear. You can die snorkeling, and if there's a sea monster down there, that might also be dangerous. And when one is working to still the mind, that can be something similar. It's kind of a sense of fear. So what one can do is try to trace that back. Like, where does this sense of fear come from? Why is it that I'm afraid? And sometimes one will trace that back, and what one finds is that it's bound up with these kind of attachments. So this kind of agitation, this worry, this anger, whatever it might be, it's bound up to some attachment that one has, that one likes. And that attachment fights back when one tries to let it go, even temporarily. And so it fights. If it loses the fight, it goes away. And the lines, the cords that bind one to these things are temporarily weakened, temporarily let go of. And that's why one can look at these things with a sense of ease, with a much more sense of ease. And it was something that was making one seem so angry, some memory from the past, or some anxiety, or some extreme restlessness, like I just got to get up, I can't keep meditating. It disappears to be replaced by this peace. And this can be like going down a thermocline in the mind. Once one has gone down one layer, and one can now, just like when one dives and looks back, one can see all the way to the top, but in front is only another 3 feet. One can look at those thoughts, those emotions that were causing one disturbance before, in a kind of equanimous way. Oh, the top of a lake is a nice place to be. You kind of, there's people paddling or whatever in kayaks and these things in Canadian lakes, in provincial parks. But if one just stays at the top of the lake all the time, then doesn't find a safe place for shelter, then if a storm comes, one is just really exposed to that. And the waves kind of whip one around. It's not peaceful. But if one has ever been snorkeling or even diving when there's a lot of rain, or even the water's a bit choppy, when you get down below the waves, and it's peaceful. It might just be some some moves like this, but it's not the same as being up on the surface. So this training of the mind, this keeping the mind with just a single object to focus, it's not the only aspect of training the mind, but it can be an important one, because as one goes down one thermocline and another thermocline, then these layers of the mind, these layers of one's experience fall away. And what's beneath these layers, what's beneath this kind of fear is increasing levels of peace. So that can be an important point for a person to keep in mind, because, kind of diving down into this lake 400 meters, and one is like staring into the abyss sometimes. And so it can be good to keep in mind, well, what was it that happened when this agitation fell away? Oh, it was replaced by a peace. And what was it that caused the agitation? What was these kind of attachments? If one meditates this way, then one eventually has to get up. If one is not a monk, then gradually one can see these kind of the mind reattaching itself to these things as one goes out, as one engages in the world, as one rushes around and does things. Gradually the mind reattaches, and when it reattaches, there's again these full-blown emotions, full-blown worries have come back all over again. One of the things that can happen to a person as they continue to practice meditation is that originally, as one is practicing meditation, can be that one is doing that to enhance one's life, enhance, say one's career, to get better at one's job, or I can work longer, I can focus better if I meditate, or one might be doing that to become, better socially, kind of feel more relaxed, less uptight when I've practiced meditation. There's less worries, less fears, and I can be more spontaneous, get along with people better. But as one goes along, what becomes apparent is that these things that one was sometimes originally practicing to enhance, they can start to become an obstacle to one's moving forward in one's meditation. Kind of these attachments to these things. And so these things that happen on a small scale, where there's this kind of fear and then a peace, they repeat themselves as one goes to meditate in a larger scale in one's life, because the mind will become more agitated, it will become more shaky if there's a fear or a worry about renouncing something that is, a kind of a pillar in one's identity in the world. A fear of, moving forward beyond that to make one's practice stronger, to move forward in the Dhamma. Kind of one has to shed these other things. So noticing this kind of cause and effect relationship can be an important spur. So, okay, at that moment, well, I remember what this was like. What's beneath these things is peace. If I keep going beyond this point, what I can find is more peace. Oh, remember I was reading a book several years ago about this famous explorer named Ernest Shackleton, and he got stranded in the Arctic. I think they'd made these ships, and I think they'd intended to make them with this hull that would like pop the ship out of the water if the ice kind of closed in around it. But for some reason, it didn't work out for them, and their ship got crushed. But they had these 3 other ships on board with them, smaller ones. And so they started dragging these ships over the ice and, hoping to find a way. And it was just this really intense book to read. I mean, there was like sea lions trying to eat them, and, basically something horrible was happening at every single turn. Something really intense happening at every single turn, basically, more or less. So worried about frostbite, worried about just about everything, anything bad that could happen. There's a possibility for that to go. There's a possibility for many things to go wrong in the Arctic. So they keep going, and they get to this portion where they can put these boats in the water and sail off. So they do, and they sail off. They sail around. They find this place where they can get onto some land, and I think they burrow into the ice a bit and make this little kind of like ice cave. And one of their crewmates had developed gangrene, I think on one of his toes. So then all these really intense things happen, and they realize that of course they can't stay in the ice cave. They have to try to go and get help from this outpost that they know is on a particular island. I don't know if they have maps. They have compasses. So the navigation in those days was not like it was with Google Maps. So I think they scrapped a couple of those ships that they had and patched up this one ship to make it stronger. So only one chance, basically. And they selected a few of their crew, the captain, Ernest Shackleton, and others as well, to go forward. So they're going up and down these huge swells, and I guess, again, there's no Google Maps, and night starts to fall in these things. Eventually they get to this island, but they couldn't land on the portion that was, where they were trying to go. So they had to land at the back portion. So they land at this back portion, and they start to trek over land. They know where this outpost is, so they're trekking all day. And for anybody who's trekked in the wilderness, it's not always what one would expect. One would think, okay, I can just go in this straight line, I'll just keep going, and I'll be at this destination. It's a couple kilometers away. Sometimes you're trekking through the wilderness, and all of a sudden in front of you, there's a cliff up ahead, not far, and you want to follow the cliff and then go down the other side. All of a sudden there's this valley, a huge chasm in front of you, and you can't go. Sometimes you have to backtrack a couple of kilometers and then get around that chasm in order to get to the cliff. There's probably many other good metaphors for practice in that. But they were trekking over land to get to this base on this island, and all of a sudden they know the base is not far away, but night might have been starting to fall, and also they were starting to get very tired. So if you're in the Arctic and you start to get tired as you're trekking, it can be very dangerous, because if you stop and you fall asleep, which apparently the body is almost like designed, it seems like a huge temptation for people, because you tend to hear that people fall asleep and die from freezing when they've been trekking, when they've been totally exhausted. So they noticed they were starting to kind of get tired, as far as I remember. And, I think it might have been getting towards night. And also they were, they had no energy. So, the Arctic, even Canada, is a different place. I mean, you can't just camp out there without shelter. You'll die. So, or you could die. So they came to the edge of this cliff, and they had an idea that the base they were trying to get to was not far ahead. So the edge of this cliff, as far as I remember, they're looking down, and it's basically mist. They can't see what's beneath it, but they can see that it kind of slopes. So what are they going to do? They can't go backwards, and in front of them is just this completely uncertain terrain. So they decide to make this human toboggan where each fellow grabs the one in front of him, and then doing that, they push off and they shove off and they go into this mist. You can kind of imagine what what kind of fears might have been coursing through a person's head in that situation. So they go into this mist, toboggan down, and thankfully the cliff was relative. The incline was smooth, and they get to the bottom. They walk, and I think it wasn't far ahead, maybe a few hundred meters was the outpost. So if anybody knows about wilderness as well, I mean, sliding down a hill, I mean, that is really something really uncertain. You could, there could be anything down there. A boulder, I mean, a tree, I mean, anything could be down there. Another drop off, but they were very, very lucky. So a person's practice can be like this, and the small victories that one gets in calm are important to notice and important to develop, because they build in larger cycles towards larger moments where one has to be prepared to take leaps into things that are completely unknown, and kind of things that cause one immense fear. The largest of these things being the fear, one of the largest of these things being the fear of life and death, and the fear of dying, of not surviving. And this is a fear that can actually come up and surface in the mind as one meditates. And there's a famous phrase from Ajahn Chah that I think it's from Ajahn Chah that one has to die before one dies. You die on the meditation cushion, because as a person's desires, as their attachments are challenged, it can feel like their whole life is falling away. So that happens on the small scale, but also on the larger scale when one actually starts to have to renounce the things that are getting in the way of one's practice. So at these times, it's good to be able to look back to the top of the water and remember what it was that one had done and what one had experienced as a result of going further. It was it was peace. It was ease. And so when these moments come up that are extremely frightening, especially when the big ones, when a big one comes up, when the moment comes one has to take a leap beyond life, beyond death, then one can remember these things and take heart. Because just like Ernest Shackleton, sliding down into the wilderness or sliding down into the mist, I mean, what was beyond that was safety. I mean, in the same way, these fears that come up in the mind, one has to trust the Dhamma, because what lies beyond them is peace. And more importantly, this kind of fear of death, I mean, one doesn't want to go and commit suicide or anything like this, but this fear of dying is nothing more than the love of life, and it's nothing more than the pain that comes from losing things that one desires, that one attaches to. But what lies beyond that is peace. That's something that the Buddha assures us of. So no matter how difficult the journey is, one can keep going. One can stare into the 400-foot lake, and if one reaches a point where one cannot go back, and all that one can do is to go forward into the mist, then one should take that leap in one's meditation practice to try to find the peace that lies beyond.